This video is part of One Last Scene, a playlist where all the greatest YouTubers come together to talk about their favorite last scenes. After you watch this video, you should check the rest of them out. Playlist link in the description. It wasn't supposed to be him. By all accounts, Spike, William the Bloody, the Doctor, or whatever name he goes by, was not supposed to get a redemption arc, not supposed to get the girl, and not supposed to save the world. But what can I say? The wheel never stops turning. This is a reminder that there will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Angel, what the hell are you waiting for? Spike, the non-broody vampire, was a hit show for the WB and later UPN in the late 1990s and early 2000s. It follows the exploits of the titular character Spike, also known as William the Bloody, a lovelorn poet turned vampire who goes from trying to take over the world to trying to save it, thanks to the love of a good woman. Or at least one could very easily tell that story. One of the great things about Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a series is that, while its main character certainly goes through it, the side characters are written with such depth that they could easily carry their own show. And in the case of Spike, we see a full fall from grace and a redemption arc. I'm certainly not the first person to have noticed this. Donna Lowe, in her article for the Whedon Studies Association's Watcher Jr. journal, entitled The Last Spike, Jungian, Individuation, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, notes that Spike's redemption arc follows Carl Jung's idea of individuation to a T. Cinema is rife with villain redemption arcs, from Maleficent to Don't Breathe. But as with any trend, in the wrong hands, the trope can just wind up clumsy at best and irresponsible at worst. Too often, the redeemed villain is less an arc than a flat circle. They don't earn their redemption. The writers just tell us we need to root for them now because there are worse people out there. A good redemption arc is going to hit you with believable character development, internal conflict, external obstacles that test the villain's commitment to their redemption, a sincere motivation to be better, some kind of sacrifice or act of contrition, an actual empathetic portrayal that lets the audience root for them, some form of reconciliation or at least understanding from those who the villain wronged, true learning from their mistakes, and a consistency with the work's overall themes.
Am I a thing worth saving, huh? Am I a righteous man?
Well, if Buffy's sibling show Angel is any indication, redemption is not really a thing that can be achieved. It's not an endpoint. There is no Catholic-style absolution in the Buffyverse. You wake up every day, you spend all day trying to push the boulder up the hill. Sometimes it slips, sometimes you make it to the top, but in the morning you're back to where you started from with the boulder at the bottom of the hill. Repeat until you die, and in some cases repeat after that too. The key is to recognize that and to be content with the journey. And that's what makes Spike's arc so compelling to watch. Unlike Angel, who accepts that the fight is everlasting in the middle of his second season,
nothing we do matters. And all that matters is what we do.
Spike is constantly asking, when does it end? And consequently, we're asking right along with him.
What's it take?
But more than that, Spike is a character primed for a sympathetic redemption because he cares about people. Certain people, anyway. Even when he has no soul. There is puzzlement and confusion in his heart. He values human connection, but he doesn't understand it.
I'll find her, wherever she is, tie her up, torture her, till she likes me again.
He doesn't understand the complexities of humanity. That lack, the hole in his heart, is what keeps him from being redeemed because, in the Buffyverse, redemption, nirvana, heaven, or whatever you want to call it, is self-actualization and fulfillment of purpose.
Death is your gift.
So to pursue that goal, you have to know what Spike is lacking. It must needs be remarked that the names Spike and William the Bloody come not from the viciousness displayed by Spike as a vampire, but from his awful pre-vampire poetry.
What's another word for gleaming?
It's not that William Pratt lacks a poetic heart. He simply lacks the talent or any insight into humanity. He was, after all, a fairly sheltered boy in his late teens and early 20s. But more than that, William seems to think of poetry as a means to an end. He wanted to seduce a woman, but she wasn't responsive to his advances, which was understandable given how clumsy they were. Still, her criticism of him is harsh and destroys him.
You're beneath me.
We see here in the early scenes, though, that Spike's main motivation was always the acceptance of other people, especially women. The woman changes, but the drive remains the same. Understanding this is key to tracking Spike's descent into evil and his eventual path to redemption. Rejected by Cecily for his bad poetry, William storms out where he runs into Drusilla. Drew tells him exactly what he wants to hear, what he needs to hear. That he's actually magnificent and misunderstood by all the troglodytes. But she can see his greatness. And only she can see his greatness. It's one of the great tricks of a manipulator to convince the victim that there really is no one else that they can turn to because they will be shunned. No one understands them. Feeling the intoxication of praise by a beautiful and desirous woman for the first time in his life, William gives himself over to her, allowing her to sire him as a vampire. Interestingly, William is as bad at being a vampire as he is at being a poet. He turns his own mother to save her from consumption and chooses her over Drusilla, but he didn't count on his vampiric mother rejecting him as well, saying much worse things than Cecily did.
You honestly thought I could bear an eternity listening to that twaddle?
Again, a rejection by a woman he holds most dear. In the end, William kills his own mother, disillusioned with the very thought of love, and reunites with Drusilla and her sires Angelus and Darla. Speaking of Angelus, that's a presence that complicates Spike's journey as he not only corrupts Spike, but he emasculates him at every turn. It's through Angelus that Spike learns the nihilistic lesson that nothing matters when you're a vampire.
There's no belonging or deserving anymore. You can take what you want, have what you want, but nothing is yours.
And while William was content to roam the countryside making love to his lack of soulmate Drusilla, Angelus teaches him the hedonistic pleasures of Bathory-level violence. Spike continues to alternate between the little brother role for Angelus or a slightly more homoerotic bottom, depending on the scene. It doesn't get any better as William rebrands himself Spike and makes his presence known everywhere he goes, which is not exactly conducive to skulking in the shadows like most vampires prefer to do. It's almost as if he revels in the attention of his foes, but it's Angel, Darla, and Drew who face the consequences for Spike's freewheeling actions.
You know what I prefer to being hunted? Getting caught.
Spike's thirst for attention can be read one of two ways. Either he has a death wish and is shooting for suicide by cop, or his relationship with his doting mother and her contemptuous vampiric counterpart has confused Spike's perception of love and hate. Like a child acting out, he assumes that any attention is good attention. Either way, this leads him into confrontations with 6 different slayers over the course of his life, something that any vampire with sense enough to pour piss out of a boot would try to avoid. Spike's initial time in Sunnydale is fraught with the same tension I described before. He has difficulty distinguishing between love, hate, and violence, and his roles in Sunnydale are at such cross purposes that it's understandable why he has the arc that he does. By the time we enter then modern-day Spike in 1997, he has assumed the role of caretaker for Drusilla as well as being her lover. Drew was always somewhat off. Rather than pathologize her, though, we'll just say that a combination of psychic powers and psychological torture has rendered her unconventional.
The King of Cups expects a picnic. But this is not his birthday. Good point.
Spike routinely defends her quirks, noting that she has a bit of a child in her. As the couple arrive in Sunnydale, though, an angry mob in Prague has weakened Drew physically as well as mentally. Drusilla's condition is ideal for Spike, though. She is now helpless and she can't leave him. Spike has all the power in their relationship for the first time. This is a reversal from when they first met, and Drew convinced Spike that only she could see through to the real him. On the flip side of the coin, Spike is regularly getting his ass kicked by Buffy, something she would later describe as,
for Spike, that's like third base.
In fact, the first time they meet, Spike conflates the violence he plans to enact on the Slayer with sexuality.
I'll make it quick. It won't hurt a bit.
Sure, he'd had violent competitive clashes with Slayers before, but here he had the added responsibility of trying to return Drusilla to health. The frustration, both goal-oriented and sexual, gets to him. This is most apparent when Angelus returns not long after Spike loses the use of his legs. The coupling of Spike feeling like less of a man, one who needs to be nursed back to health by Drusilla, and the arrival of Angelus, the alpha of their little group, leads Spike to reevaluate his allegiances. As Drew grows closer to the more virile and virulent Angelus, Spike reasons that the only way to save his relationship is to take her away from Angelus, and for that he partners with Buffy for the first time. And though they are successful in stopping Angelus from destroying the world, Drew senses that Spike has changed. He's become obsessed with Buffy because of how she frequently thwarted him. It's around this time that both Spike and the audience realize he is a masochist parading as a sadist.
You know what I prefer to being hunted? Getting caught.
Spike briefly returns to Sunnydale in the hopes of getting over Drew after she leaves him for a chaos demon. Given that Drew was the only woman who, quote, saw Spike for who he was, he's lost the reflection of himself as a confident and assured man. In the Season 2 Angel episode, Guys Will Be Guys, Tish Magev tells Angel that he does have a reflection. He's reflected in the way that the people around him see him. The same holds for Spike, but Spike and Drusilla are so codependent that Spike no longer has her reflection of him to depend on. And because all side characters are metaphors for Buffy at this point, Spike delivers his famous monologue about not being able to control love.
Love isn't brains, children. It's blood. Blood screaming inside you to work its will.
If self-actualization is Buffy's humanist promised land, then the type of love Buffy and Angel have for one another is in the way of that. And by extension, the love Spike has for Drew is also an obstacle to his redemption. Of course, since Spike is still in his villain era, that's not something he's really concerned with. Yet. He just wants Drew back, and when that fails, he returns to Sunnydale a second time to finish off the Slayer, thinking that will make him happy. Instead, Spike finds himself vampirically neutered by a chip in his brain and teaming up with Buffy against a mutual enemy, the American government. He hooks up with Harmony, who, like Drew at her weakest, is totally emotionally dependent on Spike.
Oh, you mean while I have sex with you? Well, yeah.
But she can never fulfill him because, again, he's a masochist parading as a sadist. All of this leads to Spike developing an unhealthy obsession/crush on Buffy. Spike's plot point on the love-violence continuum crosses the line to the point where he no longer wants to kill Buffy, he wants to be with her. Ironically, it might be because of a moment that wasn't even Buffy's doing.
I could ride you at a gallop until your legs buckled and your eyes rolled up. If I could squeeze you until you popped like warm champagne and you begged me to hurt you just a little bit more.
There is a recurrent theme in the work of Joss Whedon where superpowered people struggle with romantic relationships with normies because of the inherent danger in what they do and because they view themselves as toxic individuals who will eventually destroy everything they love. Gosh, I have no idea why he keeps writing that. Anyway, the solution to that is someone who can match or exceed their power. Someone they can be with in complete physical safety. But of course that opens up a whole new can of emotional worms because when you've hardened yourself to emotional experience, what kind of damage can be done if you open yourself up? For Spike, the type of person who could have staked him a dozen times over, the kind of person who can do real physical harm to him, represents a tantalizing danger.
You know what I prefer to being hunted? Getting caught.
The difference here is that Buffy is out of reach for Spike for nearly 2 years after he gets the itch. He is forced to see her as a hero and as a victim, and as a child and a mother and a sinner and a saint. You know how the song goes. The point is, unlike his mother, who was only a nurturer to a little boy grown large, and unlike Drusilla, who fostered an emotional dependence based on her admiration, Buffy offers him nothing but a vision of a well-rounded person who has flaws and strengths, just like a real person, not an abstract idea. When they finally do get together, it is on Spike's terms, even though it might not seem that way. Buffy sees him in the same way Spike saw Harmony, elevated masturbation with a side of emotional baggage. And the relationship is more than a little problematic. It's not until seeing Red in which Spike, thinking he just needs to convince Buffy that she loves him, attacks Buffy at her most vulnerable and nearly sexually assaults her before she's able to fend him off. It is a moment that is uncomfortable to watch, triggering in the most clinical definition of that word, and importantly, incredibly human. Many Buffy fans fall back on Whedon's soul canon, the idea that vampires are soulless creatures who don't know right from wrong. But you needn't look that far in humanity to see this exact kind of behavior from both men and women. The only thing you need for something like this to happen is the belief that human relations are entirely transactional. I give the girl the poem, the girl should be with me. I save the girl from tuberculosis, the girl should be with me. I give the girl adoration, the girl should be with me. I give the girl my penis, the girl should be with me. If there's a such thing as putting enough bad boy nice guy coins in the machine until you win a prize, Spike has put in a whole sack full. So to speak. It's an alcoholic's moment of clarity for Spike as he realizes that whatever dynamic he thought he offered Buffy in the world, he was wrong. And just like he did with Drusilla, he's allowed the relationship with Buffy to consume him to the point where he has no other reflection.
I don't have a reflection, so...
Sure you do. You're reflected in the people around you, the way they see you. What do you think they see?
As Lowe puts it, this example of brutal human behavior and Buffy's human response forces Spike to realize that the only way to successfully deal with his anima is not with violence against it, i.e. as a vampire would, but through introspection, self-analysis, and subsequent trial.
It stopped.
Didn't want blood. I wanted tears.
Spike knows no other way to relate than through transaction, so he fights his way, literally, to earning back his soul. For Spike as a vampire, it's the final nice guy coin in the slot so that Buffy will have to love him.
You're beneath me.
You're beneath me.
What does a man do that he mustn't for her to be hers?
But what he doesn't realize at the time is that the very act of getting his soul back is the missing piece for his own story. The soul canon is a frustratingly unexplained and often debated aspect of the Buffy universe. And that's mostly because the writers want to use it to help explain Angelus and the idea of guilty torment, but then they just wound up complicating all of the other vampire behavior. However, in an attempt to square that circle, I will posit that the soul isn't necessarily for knowing right from wrong. It's necessary for growing emotionally and spiritually. As Angel implies to Willow when she encounters her vampiric self, the vampire isn't entirely devoid of the human they were when they turned. They're just spiritually fixed at that point. It's why Darla, who lived life as a sex worker and was turned before she succumbed to syphilis, and Angelus, who had a big problem with authority and was cast out by his father, and Drusilla, who carried tremendous guilt and shame because she already thought she was possessed by demons due to her psychic powers, and of course Spike, who only knew women based on the pedestal he created for them, all carry these motivations with them in their vampiric unlives. To be re-ensouled is to gain the capacity for guilt and shame, and only through guilt and shame is there a chance for growth. This is what Spike learns upon being re-ensouled. The voices of his victims, the memories of the things he's done, they all flood into his brain at once. But as he begins to deal with remorse, he experiences incredible pain. As I said earlier, one of the reasons Spike pushes boundaries may be that he's seeking suicide by cop. In this case, Buffy. In the Season 7 episode Sleeper, Spike is confronted by his past, and he begs Buffy to end his pain by staking him.
Do it fast, okay?
It's Spike's usual MO, a dramatic attempt at lessening his own pain. But when Buffy refuses to do so because Spike was under the influence of the first evil, Spike finally turns himself over to her, fully. Not sexually or as an ally, but because he needs her, and she is promised nothing out of this act.
Help me.
Trust doesn't happen because you give someone your confidence. It's because they give you theirs. It's in this moment of vulnerability and contrition that Spike finally begins to heal. Buffy later even makes the choice to remove the chip in Spike's brain that stops him from harming humans. Buffy, who, of all people, should know the physical violence that Spike is capable of, returns to him the power to do violence. And in doing so, trust. It's an act of vulnerability that Buffy also displayed earlier in her relationship with Angel. But here it also represents a gesture of forgiveness. Forgiveness can be just as empty a gesture as an apology, but this proves to him that she generally believes that Spike with a soul can make moral choices. And in the greatest act of support for Buffy he's ever shown, is Spike, who lambasts her friends for losing faith in her and remains loyal to her at her lowest point. And he does it with nothing to gain.
You sad, sad, ungrateful traitors. She has saved your lives again and again. She has died for you.
But Spike's true moment of self-actualization arrives just before the big battle at the Hellmouth, when he spies Buffy passionately kissing Angel. Spike has just supported Buffy through her lowest time, a time when all of her friends turned their backs on her and kicked her out of her own home. He poured his heart out to her and bared his soul, telling her the same thing Drew told him, that he sees her for who she really is and she's the one. But this is no manipulation. And after all of that, after everything that he did, she still loves Angel. And Spike understands. He's disappointed, of course, and he razzes Buffy about her having angel breath. But for the first time, he understands that love expresses itself in many different ways, and often at the most inconvenient times. And we're all just trying to make sense of it. And that includes Buffy. He understands the complexities of humanity, and for that, he is a better person.
I love you.
No, you don't. So thanks for saying it.
Ultimately, stories of redemption, like Spike's, are a necessary part of our literature for the same reason we need all other types of stories. Stories aren't just entertainment. They're models for how we should behave and the behavior we should expect from others. We need redemption because we wrong people, every day and in all ways, through our actions and our inactions. We need to believe that we can be better people because hope is the fuel that heroes are made of. And we need redemption stories because sometimes, just sometimes, other people need our forgiveness.